The world was dust. It coated Clara's tongue, settled in the folds of her black morning dress, and filmed the window of the lurching stagecoach. She had stopped trying to wipe it away 2 days ago. It was just part of her now, like the numbness that had settled deep in her bones. Kansas was gone. The farm was ash. The smell of smoke, thick and greasy, still clung to her hair, though she had washed it twice in muddy creek beds. Sometimes, when the coach hit a hard rut, she would jolt awake from a half-sleep, her heart pounding, expecting to see the orange flames licking the barn rafters. She would see her father, his face grim, shoving her toward the door. She would hear her mother screaming for Thomas. But Thomas was small, and he had been asleep in the loft. Clara pressed her forehead against the hot glass. She was alone. The fire had taken them all in less than an hour. A freak accident with a lantern, her father had said, but there was no time. Now, there was only a letter, 6 months old, from a cousin of her mother's in Oregon. A name, a town, a destination. It was the only thing that had pulled her from the smoking ruin of her life and put her on this coach, heading west. Across from her, a salesman with a damp mustache snored, his head lolling. Beside him, a woman in severe gray wool clutched a Bible, her lips moving in silent, constant prayer. They were strangers. Everyone was a stranger. Clara was 19 years old, and the world had ended. She had nothing left but a few dollars sewn into her hem and a memory of smoke. The crack of the rifle was so sharp, it sounded like a splinter of wood splitting next to her ear. The salesman snapped awake with a wet gasp. The woman in gray screamed. The coach jolted, throwing Clara hard against the door. Outside, men were yelling. Horses screamed, a sound of pure terror. Another shot. The driver's body slumped half inside the coach, a dark red stain spreading across his back. The coach door was ripped open. A man with a beard the color of rust and tobacco juice filled the opening. His eyes were small and bright. "Out, all of you!" he snarled. The salesman fumbled, raising his hands. "Please, I have money. Just take the money." "We'll take it all, friend," a second man said, laughing. He had no front teeth. He grabbed the salesman by his coat and hauled him out. Clara heard a thud, a grunt, and then silence. The woman in gray was sobbing, holding her Bible to her chest. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The red-bearded man grabbed her arm. "He ain't here, lady." He dragged her out into the bright, terrible sunlight. Clara scrambled to the far corner, pressing herself against the leather seat. She was small, and for a moment, they seemed to forget her. She heard the men ransacking the luggage, oaths splitting the air, the sound of a bottle breaking. Then, the toothless man appeared at the door again. "Well, looky here. Missed one." He grabbed her by the arm. His grip was like iron. Clara fought, kicking, scratching, but he just laughed and pulled her clear of the coach. She fell to her knees in the dust. The world spun. She saw the salesman and the driver, both still, lying near the horses. The woman in gray was nowhere to be seen. "What about this one? Jed," the toothless man called. The leader, Jed, walked over. He looked down at Clara, his eyes traveling over her torn dress, her face. She was covered in dirt and tears. He nudged her shoulder with his boot. "She ain't much." "We could have some fun," the other man suggested, licking his lips. Jed spat. "We ain't got time. They'll send men from the depot when the coach don't show." He looked around, his gaze settling on a thicket of pines about 30 yards from the road. "But we ain't done here. This is good country for an ambush. Someone else might come along." He grabbed Clara's hair, yanking her head back. She cried out, "Put her over there. Tie her to a tree. Someone rides by, sees a damsel in distress. We get his horse and his wallet. Bait!" The toothless man cackled. Clara was dragged across the rocky ground. The stones tore at her palms. She was shoved against the rough bark of a pine tree. A rope, coarse and heavy, was wrapped around her wrists, binding them tight. Another went around her waist. "Don't scream too much, little bird," Jed said. "We'll be watching." She felt a sudden, bright explosion of pain at the side of her head. The world tilted, went dark at the edges, and then dissolved into nothing. Pain woke her, a throbbing, sick pulse behind her right eye. Her mouth was full of cotton and dust. For a long moment, she knew nothing, only that she hurt. Then memory returned, sharp and cold. The ambush, the men. She was slumped against the tree. The rope at her wrists had cut deep. Her hands were numb, her arms aching from the strain. She could smell the pine sap, sticky and sharp. And something else. Blood. Her own. A fly buzzed near her face, drawn by the damp, matted hair above her ear where the man had struck her. She was terrified. A raw, paralyzing fear that made it hard to breathe. They had left her as bait. Were they still here? Were they watching her from the rocks? She pulled against the ropes. It was useless. The hemp bit deeper, sending fresh waves of fire up her arms. Her wrists were raw, bleeding. She sagged, letting her head fall forward. Tears came, hot and silent, cutting clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "Mama," she whispered. The word was a dry scrape. She was so thirsty. The sun beat down on her, filtered through the pine needles, but it was hot. She was shivering, a deep coldness in her that had nothing to do with the air. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her skin exposed. She felt filthy, violated, even though they had not yet. The thought sent a fresh jolt of panic through her. Time passed. An hour, 2. The sun moved, and the shadow of the pine tree shifted, leaving her in the full, hot glare. She licked her lips. They were cracked. She heard a sound, a branch snapping. Her head jerked up. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it would break. "Who's there?" Her voice was barely audible. Silence. Then, another sound. The careful slide of a boot on gravel. They were coming back. Colt Mercer cursed the heat, the horse, and the life he was living. He had tried. He had truly, honestly tried. He had spent the last 8 months trying to be the man Elspeth had wanted him to be. He had built a small cabin, dug post holes for a fence, had even tried to grow corn. The corn had failed. The silence of the cabin had become a living thing, a weight that pressed on him day and night. The fences had felt like a cage. 3 days ago, he had walked out, leaving the door unlatched. He left the cornfield to the crows and the cabin to the wind. He was not meant for fences. He was not meant for settling. He was good at 2 things, riding and trouble, and he was usually riding away from the latter. He was heading south, no destination in mind, just moving. He was cutting through the high country to avoid the main trails when he heard the shots. 2, maybe 3, fast, then a pause, then one more. He pulled his horse, a tough bay gelding, into a stand of juniper and waited. He was a cautious man. He had learned caution through hard lessons that had left scars on his skin and on his soul. He listened, yelling, men, angry. He dismounted, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. He moved on foot, keeping to the rocks, his spurs silenced with a twist of cloth. He moved slow. It took him 20 minutes to circle around to a rocky outcrop overlooking the trail. He saw the scene below, the overturned stagecoach, the bodies. He counted 2. Driver and a passenger. Looked like road agents. He saw the tracks. 3. No, 4 different horses. They had ransacked the coach and scattered the luggage. Amateurs, he thought. Too messy or too cruel. He waited. A long time. The sun was high and hot. Nothing moved. He was about to ease back, to circle wide and leave this trouble to whoever found it next, when he saw the tracks in the dust, boot prints, drag marks, leading from the coach toward a thicket of pines. His gut tightened. This was wrong. He had seen this before. He scanned the ridges. His eyes narrowed. He was being watched. He knew it. He could feel the eyes on his back. A trap. He stayed flat on the rock, barely breathing, watching the pines. Nothing, just the wind, but the drag marks. He waited another 10 minutes. Patience was the only reason he was still alive. Then, he eased back, went to his horse, and let it down into a dry wash, keeping it hidden. He tied it, checking the cinch, and moved back toward the trees, this time from the south, keeping a high ridge between him and where he guessed the ambushers were hiding. He moved like smoke, rifle up. He smelled the pine before he saw her. And the blood. She was slumped against a tree, her head hanging, a dark mass of hair, a torn dress. He saw the ropes on her wrists. He saw the blood. He stopped, his jaw tight. Bait. His instinct screamed at him. Get out, right away. This was not his fight. This was the kind of trouble that got a man killed for no reason. He looked at her. Her head was down, but he could see the dirt on her cheek, the way her shoulders trembled. Even in the heat, he thought of Elspeth. He thought of that other fire, that other scene of violence he had arrived at too late. He swore, a single, bitter word under his breath. He could not leave her. He stepped out from the rocks, moving quickly, his rifle leveled at the ridge line, not at her. He expected a shot. None came. He reached her in 3 long strides. She heard the boot slide and her head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, glazed with terror and pain. She saw him, a tall shadow, a man, a rifle. A dry, desperate sound tore from her throat, and she began to thrash, pulling against the ropes, her body twisting in blind panic. Easy, Colt said. His voice was a low rasp, unused to softness. He dropped his rifle, letting it hang on its sling, and pulled his knife. At the sight of the blade, she screamed again, a raw, broken sound. He stopped. He held his hands up, the knife held flat, butt first toward her. Easy, girl. I'm not them. I'm here to cut you loose. She froze, her chest heaving. She stared at him, her mind struggling to understand. He was not Jed. He was not the toothless man. His eyes were different. They were gray, hard as stone, but they were not cruel. They were tired. They're gone, he said, his voice quiet. He kept his movement slow, deliberate. They set you as a trap. They're likely watching from those rocks. We have to be fast. He stepped forward. She flinched. Pressing herself so hard against the pine, she scraped her back. It's all right, he said, softer this time. I won't hurt you. He reached behind her and sliced the rope at her waist. It fell away. Then he grabbed her hands. They were cold, despite the heat. She winced as his fingers brushed the raw skin of her wrists. But she did not pull away. He sawed through the thick hemp. The moment she was free, her legs gave out. She pitched forward. Colt caught her, his arm going around her waist. She was light, like a bundle of dry sticks. She weighed almost nothing. She gasped at his touch, her whole body rigid. I've got you, he said. He pulled her up, half lifting, half dragging her. We have to move, now. He led her away from the road, deeper into the trees, pushing through scrub oak and manzanita. She stumbled, her legs refusing to work right. He did not slow down. He gripped her arm, pulling her along, his other hand on his rifle, his eyes constantly scanning the rocks above. He did not breathe easy until they were half a mile away. Down in a deep arroyo where the rock walls rose up on 3 sides. It was defensible. It was hidden. He let go of her. She immediately sank to the ground, curling into a ball, her arms wrapped around her knees, shivering violently. Colt watched her for a moment. She looked like a child. He turned away, setting his rifle against the rock, and began to build a fire. He worked with an economy of motion. He did not build a large, smoking fire. He made a small, hot fire in a shallow pit, using dry wood that would not send up a plume of smoke. When it was lit, he unhooked his canteen and walked over to her. He knelt, not too close, and held it out. Clara stared at the canteen. Her hand, smeared with blood and dirt, rose, shaking. She could not make her fingers grip it. Colt sighed. He uncapped it and held it to her lips. Just drink. The water was warm and tasted of tin, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. It burned down her raw throat. She drank too fast, choked, and he pulled it away. Slow, he said. She drank again, this time slower. When she was done, she leaned back against the rock, the shivering easing just a little. He stood up and unlashed his bedroll. He pulled a heavy canvas duster from it and dropped it on her lap. "Put that on. It'll be cold tonight." She fumbled with the coat. It was huge. It smelled of dust, leather, coffee, and him. She wrapped it around herself, pulling it tight. The sheer weight of it was a comfort. She watched him. He was not one of the outlaws. He had saved her. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and moved with a quiet, dangerous grace. His face was hard, browned by the sun, with the lines etched around his eyes. He was not a soft man, but he had been gentle. "Thank you," she whispered. Her throat felt thick. He grunted, not looking at her. He was checking his rifle, his back partially to her. He reached up to resettle the strap on his shoulder, and he winced, a sharp, involuntary movement. Clara saw it. She had seen her father move like that when he had pulled a muscle in his back. But this seemed different. When the man turned back toward the fire, his faded blue shirt pulled tight across his chest. She saw the shirt was old, and near his side, it gapped slightly. She saw a scar, a long, pale, puckered line that disappeared down past his ribs. He caught her looking. His eyes went cold. He pulled his shirt down, his gaze flat and hard, daring her to speak. Clara dropped her eyes to the fire. She said nothing. She had seen the wounds on her father's farm animals, but never on a man. This man was covered in them. The wound at his shoulder was stiff, and the scar on his ribs was old. He was a man made of old injuries. The sun began to dip, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and purple. The air grew cold fast. The fire was a small circle of warmth in the growing dark. Colt sat on the other side of the fire, his back against a rock, his rifle across his lap. He had shared his jerky and hardtack with her. She had eaten, though her stomach recoiled. She needed the strength. She was exhausted, her entire body a map of pain from her head to her scraped palms, but she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the red-bearded man. She saw the toothless grin. She felt the rope. She curled tighter in the heavy duster, her good hand clutching her torn dress at her throat. She watched the man. He had not moved in an hour. He just stared into the darkness, his head tilted, listening. A quiet settled between them, thick and heavy. It was not a comfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had seen the worst of the world. She was broken and terrified. He was something else, guarded, dangerous, and, she realized, just as alone as she was. Colt watched the shadows. He was used to the night. He was used to the watching. He heard her, the tiny, hitching breaths she took every few minutes, the sound of a woman trying not to cry. It made his shoulder ache. He stared into the low flames. The fire twisted, and for a second, he did not see the rocks of the arroyo. He saw the burned-out shell of a cabin. He smelled smoke, different from their campfire, the same greasy, awful smell that Clara carried on her. He saw Elspeth. She had been small, like this one. She had believed in him. She had believed he could be a farmer, a husband, a good man. He had been in town, selling the few pelts he had trapped. When the drifters came through, he had come back to find the cabin in ruins. And Elspeth, he had buried her. He had hunted the men. He had found them. It had not made him feel any better. It had only reminded him that he was not a good man. He was the man who had brought violence to her door and had not been there to protect her from it. He looked at the small, dark shape huddled across the fire. Clara. She was shivering again. He saw her pale hands, laced with blood, clutching his coat. He had failed Elspeth. He had run from her memory, from the fences that mocked him, and the world had, in its cruel way, brought him right back to the same place. Here was another woman, broken by violence, and he was the only thing standing between her and the dark. He set his jaw. He was not a good man. He was not a farmer, but he was alive, and he was here. He shifted his rifle, the familiar weight a cold comfort. He would not fail this one. He would watch until morning. Clara woke to the sound of a bird and the ache of every muscle in her body. The sun was a bright, clean line on the eastern rock wall of the arroyo. She was stiff from the cold ground, her head pounding a dull, rhythmic beat behind her eyes. Colt was gone. For a moment, pure, cold panic seized her. He had left her, just as she had been left before. She scrambled to her feet, the heavy duster falling away, and looked around the empty campsite. The fire was a circle of gray ash. His bedroll was gone. His saddle was gone. Then she saw him. He was at the far end of the arroyo, standing by his horse, checking its hooves. He had not left. He had just given her the privacy of waking alone. She sank back onto her heels, her relief so profound it made her dizzy. He was still here. She was still safe. She looked down at herself. The black morning dress was ripped and smeared with dirt and her own dried blood. Her hair was a tangled mat, sticky with pine sap. She felt the grime on her skin, a crawling, suffocating layer of filth that smelled of sweat, fear, and the men who had touched her. She had to be clean. A small creek, barely a trickle, ran along the far side of the arroyo. She picked up the piece of hardtack he had left for her on a flat rock, but she could not eat. She walked toward the water, her movements wooden. Colt watched her go. He said nothing, just turned back to his horse, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The water was shockingly cold. It numbed her feet as she waded in, holding her torn skirts up. She found a deeper pool, almost knee-high, and knelt in the mud. She scrubbed at her face, her hands, her arms. She tried to wash her hair, the icy water making her gasp. She looked at her wrists. The rope burns were raw, an angry purple and red, swollen and weeping. She saw the red-bearded man's eyes, the gap in the other's teeth. She felt the rope tighten, the hot breath on her cheek. Her own breath hitched. The water was not washing it away. The filth was not on her skin. It was inside her. She began to scrub harder, desperately, her nails digging into her own arms, as if she could tear the memory from her flesh. A branch snapped in the brush on the far bank. Clara screamed. It was not a word, just a raw sound of animal terror. She fell backward into the shallow water, scrambling, crab-walking away, her eyes fixed on the trees. They were here. They had found her. She was trapped. Clara! Colt's voice cut through the panic. She turned, her heart hammering. He was standing on the bank, perhaps 20 feet away. He had not moved closer. His hands were empty, held loosely at his sides. "It's all right," he said. His voice was low and steady, not much louder than the creek itself. "It was just a rabbit. I saw it run." She stared at him, her chest heaving, water dripping from her hair into her eyes. She was still poised to run, to fight, to dissolve. He did not move. He did not rush to help her, did not try to touch her or soothe her. He just stood there, solid as the rock behind him, letting her have the space. "You're safe," he said again. "I'm right here. No one is going to hurt you." He waited. He simply waited, his gray eyes on her, until the terror slowly receded, leaving her shaking and cold in the muddy water. He let her be the one to decide when the danger was past. He gave her back the control she had lost. Slowly, her breathing steadied. The trees on the far bank were just trees again. She was cold, and she was wet, but the crushing panic had eased. She looked at him, a silent, ragged gratitude in her eyes. He nodded, once, and turned his back. "We should move before the sun gets high." They traveled south. The plan was simple. He had explained. The nearest town was Clearwater, 2 days' ride. It was a small crossing, but it had a sheriff and a telegraph. He would take her there, and she could find help. He had insisted she ride the horse. He walked beside her, his long legs eating up the miles, his rifle held in the crook of his arm. The landscape was brutal and magnificent. Red rock, high mesas, and a sky so vast and blue it almost hurt to look at. But Clara saw none of it. She sat in the saddle, clutching the horn, her gaze turned inward. The silence stretched for hours, broken only by the plod of the horse and the scrape of Colt's boots. He did not press her to talk. He just walked, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges, the horizon, every shadow. He was a man who expected trouble. Perhaps it was his silence that finally let her speak. Her voice was thin, dry as the dust. "The fire started in the barn," she said. Colt's head turned slightly. He did not stop walking. "My father," he said. "A lantern fell. It was so fast. The hay, he got me out. He and my mother. They went back. For my brother. Thomas." She stopped. Her hand tightened on the saddle horn until her knuckles were white. "He was 8. He liked to sleep in the loft. He said it was closer to the stars." Colt said nothing. He just kept walking. His face was grim, but it was not pity. It was a hard, shared understanding. "They didn't come out," she whispered. "The roof fell in. I waited all night. In the morning, there was nothing left, just smoke and ash." She told him about the letter from her mother's cousin, about selling the last 2 hogs that had survived, just to buy the stagecoach ticket, about traveling for weeks, feeling like a ghost. Then, her voice dropped lower. "They killed the driver first. The other men, they just pulled them out. The woman in gray, she was praying. He just dragged her away. I don't know what happened to her." She was shaking. "They called me bait. They hit me." She touched the side of her head, the large, tender knot above her ear. "I thought they were coming back. Every sound, I thought it was them." Colt stopped. He put a hand on the horse's neck. He looked up at her. "They're not coming back for you," he said. His voice was flat, a statement of fact. "I cut your trail with mine and covered it. They'll think you wandered off and died, or the coyotes got you. They won't be looking." She searched his face. He was not just offering comfort. He was telling her a truth he understood. He was a hunter. He knew how to hide a trail. He knew how to think like one. They stopped at noon, when the sun was a white-hot coin directly overhead. They were in a shallow canyon, a narrow river cutting through the sandstone. It was green here, with cottonwoods lining the banks. "We'll rest the horse," Colt said. He helped her dismount. His hands were rough, but his touch was impersonal, helping her down as he would a sack of flour. "Water yourself and the horse. I'm going to wash." He took a small piece of lye soap from his saddlebag and walked downstream, disappearing around a bend. Clara drank from the river, the water cool and sweet. She splashed it on her face, grateful for the relief from the dust. She sat in the shade of a cottonwood, her back against the trunk. She should have been afraid. Him leaving her alone, but she was not. She knew he was close. Curiosity, a feeling she thought had died in the fire, pricked at her. She stood and walked silently on the soft riverbank. She rounded the bend. He was in the river, the water to his waist. His back was to her. He had his shirt off. Clara stopped, her breath catching. His back was a landscape of old pain, a long, ropey scar cut diagonally from his left shoulder blade to his right hip. Several smaller, puckered scars littered his skin, pale against his sun-darkened torso. He was lean, but powerfully built, all rope and sinew. He dunked his head under the water, scrubbing at his hair. As he came up, he turned, sluicing the water from his face with his hand. He saw her. He froze. His entire body went rigid. He did not move to cover himself. He just watched her, his expression instantly guarded, closed. Clara's eyes were drawn to his chest, to the scar she had glimpsed the night before. It was long and vicious, starting near his collarbone and vanishing into the water. It looked like a knife wound. She did not know why she did it. She was not thinking. She was just drawn to this map of survival that mirrored the new, invisible map on her own soul. She stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the mud at the river's edge. She reached out a trembling hand. Her fingertips, still cold from the creek water, brushed the top of the scar on his chest. Colt sucked in a sharp, ragged breath. He flinched, his muscles knotting under her touch as if she had burned him. His hand came up, grabbing her wrist. His grip was not violent, but it was iron. Their eyes met, hers, wide and questioning. His, dark and turbulent, a storm of things she could not name. He held her wrist for a long, silent moment. Then, slowly, deliberately. He uncurled his fingers. He did not pull away. He let her hand rest there. He let her look. "What happened to you?" she whispered. He looked away, his gaze falling to the swirling water. "It was a long time ago." "You saved me," she said, her voice quiet. "I want to know." He was silent for a moment. He stepped back, the water swirling around his waist, and her hand fell away. He turned, retrieved his shirt from a rock, and began to wring it out, his back to her. "The world is a hard place, Clara," he said, his voice rough. "You learn that, or you die." He looked over his shoulder, his face in shadow. "I've done things I'm not proud of, things I had to do, and some things I just did." He turned to face her fully, his bare chest slick with water. "You think I'm a good man. I'm not. You should stay clear of men like me. I bring trouble." Clara shook her head. The memory of him at the creek, his patience, his quiet voice was too strong. "You're not like them," she insisted. "You're decent." His mouth twisted, a bitter, humorless smile. "Decent," he repeated, as if the word tasted bad. He pulled the damp shirt on, wincing as the cold, wet fabric hit his skin. "Let's get moving. The sky's turning." She looked up. The brilliant blue was gone, replaced by a high, hazy veil of yellow-gray. The wind had picked up, and it had a strange, mournful whine to it. Colt was already moving, striding back to the horse. "Dust storm," he said, his voice tight. "A bad one, by the looks of it." He checked the saddle, his movements fast, efficient. "There's a line cabin northwest of here, used by trappers. We can make it if we ride hard." He swung into the saddle and reached down for her. "Come on." She took his hand, and he hauled her up, setting her in front of him. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, his chest a solid, damp wall at her back. The horse lunged into a canter. The world changed in an hour. The sun vanished, choked by a roiling, churning wall of red dust that stretched from the ground to the heavens. The wind screamed, a physical force that tore at them, stinging their eyes and filling their mouths with grit. Colt bent low, shielding Clara with his body. He did not slow the horse. He seemed to be navigating by instinct. His head turned, his eyes narrowed to slits. Just when Clara thought her lungs would burst from the dust, a shape loomed out of the red gloom. A small, dark square. A cabin. Colt slid from the horse, pulling her down with him. "Get inside!" He yelled over the wind. He shoved her toward the door and grabbed the horse's reins, leading it toward a dilapidated lean-to on the cabin's sheltered side. Clara stumbled inside, falling to her knees on the hard-packed dirt floor. The cabin was one room, dark and small. It smelled of old wood smoke, pack rats, and dust. A broken table lay on its side, and a crude stone fireplace dominated one wall. Colt came in, slamming the heavy wooden door against the storm. He dropped a bar into place. The sound of the wind was instantly muffled, reduced to a high-pitched, terrifying shriek. They were in near darkness, the only light coming from the cracks in the walls. They stood, breathing hard, dust caked on their faces, in their hair. They were trapped. The storm howled for 2 days. They were prisoners in the small, dark room. Colt had supplies in his saddlebags. Jerky, hardtack, coffee. He had a small store of firewood in the lean-to. He built a fire, and the small cabin became a pocket of warmth in the middle of the screaming, red world. They spoke little. They ate. They drank the tin-flavored coffee. Colt sat cleaning his rifle, his movements precise, hypnotic. Clara sat wrapped in his bedroll, watching the flames. The forced intimacy was profound. They were the only 2 people in the world. On the second morning, the wind eased for a time. Colt layered on his duster. "Need more wood, if this holds for another night." He went out. Clara watched the door, an unreasonable fear gripping her. He was gone for a long time. When he returned, his arms were loaded with split logs. He kicked the door shut and dumped the wood by the hearth. He leaned against the wall, his head down, breathing hard. "Colt?" she asked. He did not answer, but she saw his hand was pressed high on his chest, gripping his shoulder. He had his shirt on, but a dark, wet stain was spreading on the faded blue fabric. "You're hurt," she said, scrambling to her feet. "It's nothing," he growled, but his face was pale, drawn with pain. "Old wound. I tore it lifting." "Sit down," she said. Her voice was surprisingly firm. "Let me see." He looked at her, his eyes sharp, ready to refuse, but the pain was too deep. He grunted and slowly, painfully, lowered himself to sit on the floor by the fire. "The shirt has to come off," she said. He hesitated. This was different from the river. Here, he was injured. He was vulnerable. He finally nodded, his jaw tight. She knelt in front of him. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons. His skin was hot. She could feel the heat radiating from him. She tried to be gentle, easing the fabric off his good shoulder first, then sliding it carefully off the other. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, as the cloth pulled at the wound. It was the old bullet hole, high on his shoulder. It was torn open, bleeding sluggishly. His entire shoulder muscle was knotted, trembling in spasm. "Water," she said. He nodded toward his canteen. She found a clean rag in his saddlebag. She dipped it in the water, her hands steady. She knelt before him again, so close she could see the pulse beating in his throat. She began to clean the wound. He watched her, his expression unreadable. His muscles jumped and shivered under her touch, but he did not pull away. She was all focus, her movements gentle. "Sure." She worked, intensely aware of the breadth of his chest, the hard plane of his stomach, the way the firelight played over his skin and the scars. His breathing was heavy, the sound loud in the small cabin. When the wound was clean, she took a strip of cloth from her own petticoat to make a bandage. She had to reach around him to wrap it. Her arm brushed his ribs. He sucked in a breath. She tied the knot, her fingers lingering for a second on his good shoulder. His skin was burning. She looked up. His eyes were closed, his head tipped back against the wall. His face was a mask of tightly controlled pain. As she watched, his eyes opened. They were dark, intense, and fixed on her. He looked at her, his gaze dropping to her mouth. The air in the cabin became thick, heavy. He slowly lifted his hand, the one that was not clutching his knee. His fingers were rough, calloused. He reached toward her face, as if to touch her cheek, to brush away the smudge of soot she knew was there. His hand hovered, trembling slightly. An inch from her skin, Clara stopped breathing. She did not move. He stared at her, a silent, terrible battle waging in his eyes. Then, with a suddenness that made her flinch, he clenched his hand into a fist and dropped it to his side. He turned his head, staring into the fire. The moment was gone. Clara pulled back, her own hands trembling. She sat on her bedroll, pulling her knees to her chest. The wind outside began to howl again, as if the storm had never left. The silence in the room was worse than the wind. It was filled with the thing that had almost happened. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice so low it was almost lost in the shriek of the storm. "They ruined me," she whispered. Colt did not look at her. "I can still feel their hands," she said, her voice breaking. Tears she had held back for 2 days began to fall, hot and fast. "They looked at me, like I was nothing, like I was just a thing for them to use." She wrapped her arms around her legs, burying her face. "I can't get it off. I washed, but I'm still dirty. I'll always be dirty." She wept, not loudly, but with a deep, hopeless finality. "I'll never feel clean again. I'll never feel desirable. No decent man would ever. I'm broken." Colt sat for a long time, his profile rigid, his bandaged shoulder a stark white in the firelight. He listened to her quiet, desperate sobs, when she had no tears left, and a hiccuping silence filled the room. He finally moved. He shifted his body, turning to look at her. His face was in shadow, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glittered in the firelight. His voice, and when he spoke, was low, soft, but with a gravelly intensity that cut through her despair and the sound of the wind. "That's not what I see when I look at you." Clara's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, her face streaked with tears and dirt. He was looking at her, not with pity, but with a raw, aching honesty. He held her gaze, his own unwavering. He did not say she was wrong. He did not say she was clean. He just told her what he saw. That night, they laid out their bedrolls. The storm had finally worn itself out, leaving an exhausted, eerie quiet. They lay on opposite sides of the hearth, not touching. Clara stared at the dying embers. She could still feel the phantom touch of his hand, almost on her cheek. She could still hear his voice. Colt lay on his back, staring at the dark ceiling. His shoulder throbbed. He was fighting. He was fighting the memory of Elspeth, and he was fighting the raw, protective desire he felt for the woman lying only a few feet away. A desire that, in his mind, made him no better than the men she feared. But in the dark, quiet cabin, walled in by the dust, something new settled. She was not afraid of the man across the fire. He was not disgusted by the woman he had saved. For the first time since the fire in Kansas, Clara closed her eyes and did not see flames. For the first time since he had buried his wife, Colt lay in the dark and did not feel hunted. They were not touching, but for the first time in a long time, neither of them was truly alone. They were safe. The world after the dust storm was raw and scoured clean. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the air smelled of wet sand and ozone. They rode toward Clearwater, Colt back in the saddle, his freshly bandaged shoulder tight, and Clara seated behind him. She held on to him, her hands resting lightly on his waist. It was the first time she had initiated contact. After the intimacy of the cabin, the shared fear, and the quiet confessions, it felt natural. He was warm, solid, and real. He was the only real thing in a world that had become a nightmare. They were riding through a narrow cut, the rock walls rising high on either side. When the first shot rang out, the bullet screamed off the stone 10 feet in front of them, whining like an angry hornet. Colt did not hesitate. There was no thought, only action. He kicked the horse, driving it forward, and drew his revolver in a single, fluid motion. "Hold on!" he yelled. Clara screamed and wrapped her arms tight around his chest, burying her face in his back. She felt his body tense, his muscles turning to steel beneath her arms. A man on a gray horse appeared on the rim of the canyon above them. He raised his rifle. Colt fired. The sound was deafening. A huge explosion next to her ear. The man on the rim jerked, his rifle discharging into the air, and he toppled backward out of sight. Another rider burst from a cluster of boulders ahead of them, firing wildly. Colt swerved the horse, pushing it up against the canyon wall. He brought his revolver up, his arm steady, and fired twice. The man's chest erupted in a cloud of dust and blood, and he fell from his saddle, one foot catching in the stirrup. His horse bolted, dragging him. It was over in 5 seconds. There was only the sound of their own horses' panicked breathing and the echo of the shots fading between the rocks. Colt reined the horse to a plunging halt. He was breathing hard, his body a rigid line of tension. He swung his head, his eyes scanning the rocks, the rim, every shadow. "Are you hit?" he asked, his voice a low, harsh growl she barely recognized. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. She was clinging to him so tightly her arms ached. "Are you?" "No." He holstered his pistol and grabbed her wrists. "Let go! Get down!" He slid from the saddle, pulling her down after him. Her legs buckled. She would have fallen if he had not been holding her arm. He dragged her behind a tall spire of rock, pushing her into the narrow space between the stone and the canyon wall. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound." He left her. He melted back into the rocks, his rifle up, moving toward the man he had shot. Clara sank to the ground, her back scraping against the rough sandstone. She was trembling so hard she could not control it. The violence had been too fast, the sound of the shots, the sight of the man falling. It was all mixed up with the memory of the stagecoach, the red-bearded man. The blow to her head. She wrapped her arms around her knees, choking back sobs. She had thought she was safe. She had believed him. But he was just a man, and the world was full of violence. It would find them. It would always find her. She heard a single, final shot. The sound made her jump. A small, terrified cry escaping her lips. Had they shot him? Was he dead? Was she alone again? The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. She waited, counting her own heartbeats, each one a painful drum in her chest. Then, his boots scraped on the gravel. He appeared around the edge of the rock. His face was grim, his rifle held loosely in one hand. "It's done," he said. He looked at her, huddled on the ground, shaking apart. The hardness in his face dissolved. He sighed, a weary, heavy sound, and leaned his rifle against the rock. He knelt in front of her. "Clara." She looked up, her face pale, streaked with tears and fresh dust. She could not stop shaking. He did not hesitate this time. He did not stop to think. He reached out and pulled her to him. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, pressing her face into his shoulder. "You're all right," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you. It's over. You're all right." The embrace was not gentle. It was firm, desperate, and absolute. It was the hold of a man anchoring himself as much as he was anchoring her. Clara clung to him, her fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. She inhaled the scent of him, dust, gunpowder, and the faint, clean smell of the lye soap from the river. She wept into his shoulder. All the terror of the past few days, all the horror, all the grief, pouring out of her in a storm of shuddering, silent sobs. He just held her. He did not shush her. He did not pat her back. He just held her, solid as the rock around them, letting her break apart so she could put herself back together. When the trembling finally eased, she did not pull away. She just stayed, her ear pressed to his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice muffled. "I thought I was done being scared." "I know," he said, his voice a low rumble. She leaned back, just enough to look at him. His face was close, his gray eyes searching hers. The lines around them were deep with concern. "I'm broken," she whispered, the terrible, secret fear finally spoken aloud. "They broke me. What they did, what they said, I can feel it. It's like a poison." She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "No decent man. No one would ever want someone like me, someone who's spoiled." Colt's hand tightened on her shoulder. He made her look at him. His expression was fierce. "Do you think you're alive just to be wanted by a man?" he asked, his voice rough. "Those men took enough from you. Don't you let them take your life. Not the one you've still got to live." He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want you to be pretty. I don't want you to be clean for someone else. I want you to live. For you. Do you hear me? You're alive. Clara, that's all that matters. You live." His words struck her, a clean, sharp shock. He was not telling her she was wrong. He was not telling her she was still desirable. He was telling her it did not matter. Not. He was telling her she was more than what had been done to her. She was a life, not a thing to be wanted or unwanted. She stared at him, a new, fragile kind of hope blooming in her chest. He saw her, not her shame, not her dirt, not her trauma. He saw her will to survive. They stayed like that for a long time, the silence of the ravine settling around them. He did not let her go, and she did not pull away. That night, they camped in the shelter of the rocks. The two dead men were miles behind them, their horses scattered. Colt had taken their canteens and a bag of ammunition. He built a small, smokeless fire. The mood was different. The violence had bound them closer, and his words had given her a new, unsteady ground to stand on. She sat watching him. He was staring into the flames, his profile hard and thoughtful. The firelight flickered on the scar that ran down his cheek, the one she had not noticed before. He was a man made of scars, a survivor, just like her. He had given her life, not just by cutting the ropes, but by giving her a reason to live it, for herself. Slowly, her heart pounding, she moved. She crawled the few feet that separated them, her knees sinking into the sandy dirt. He turned his head, his eyes questioning as she knelt beside him. She did not say anything. She was shaking again, but this time it was not from fear. It was from choice. She leaned in, and before she could lose her nerve, she pressed her lips to his. It was a clumsy, hesitant kiss. Her lips were dry, chapped. She did not know what she was doing. She only knew she needed to. She needed to feel something other than fear. She needed to feel alive. For a second, he was completely still, a statue of surprise. Then, his hand came up to her jaw, his rough fingers gentle. He kissed her back. His lips were not soft, but they were warm, and they tasted of coffee and dust. The kiss was slow, questioning. He was not taking, he was asking. The stubble on his chin was rough against her skin. She felt a jolt, a deep, surprising tremor of heat that had nothing to do with the fire. She pressed closer, her hand coming to rest on his uninjured shoulder. She felt the hard muscle beneath his shirt. The kiss deepened. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her onto his lap. She gasped, her fear and her need colliding. He was so strong. His mouth moved over hers, and he tilted his head, his hand tangled in her hair. It was intense, and it was overwhelming, and it was everything she had been afraid of. Then, just as she was losing herself in it, he stopped. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. His eyes were closed. Clara pulled back, confusion and a sharp, cold sting of hurt rising in her. She had been wrong. He did not want her. She was still, and would always be. The broken, dirty thing from the tree. She tried to slide off his lap. His arm tightened, holding her in place. He did not open his eyes. "Clara," he whispered, his voice ragged. He sounded like he was in pain. She waited. He finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, almost black in the firelight, and filled with a raw, agonizing conflict. "I want you," he whispered, the words torn from him. "I want you so much I can barely breathe." She stared at him, her hurt fading, replaced by confusion. "Then why?" "Because of this," he said, his voice dropping so low she had to lean in to hear him. "Because you're grateful. Because you're scared. Because you think you owe me. I will not be another man who takes something from you that you're not ready to give." He cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing the tear tracks on her cheeks. "I want you too much to take what you're not ready to give." She understood then. The hurt vanished, replaced by a wave of emotion so powerful it stole her breath. He was not rejecting her. He was protecting her. He was protecting her from himself, from her own gratitude, from the very choice he had told her to make. He was giving her back her life, and now he was giving her back her will. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand clutching his shirt. He was a good man. He could say he was not, but he was the best man she had ever known. They arrived in Clearwater the next day. It was not much of a town, just a dozen false-fronted buildings sagging under the hot sun. A wide, dusty street, a livery, a saloon, and a general store. Colt left her with the horse at the livery. "I need to see the sheriff. Wait here." She watched him walk across the street, his stride long and purposeful. He did not look like a man who had been in a gunfight less than 24 hours ago. He looked like he owned the ground he walked on. He was inside the sheriff's office for a long time. Clara waited, her anxiety growing. When he came out, his face was like thunder. He strode back, grabbed the horse's reins, and said one word. "We're leaving." "What happened?" she asked, hurrying to keep up as he led the horse toward the inn. "The sheriff?" "The sheriff is a man named Brody," Colt said, his voice flat and cold. "We knew each other, a long time ago." "He won't help?" "He told me," Colt said, stopping in front of the saloon, which had Clearwater Inn painted on a faded sign above the door. That a girl like you probably got what she deserved for traveling alone, and that I should ride out before my own past caught up with me. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. No help. The law was no help at all. He's paid off, Colt continued, his voice void of all emotion. The outlaws, whoever they are, they run this part of the territory. This town is theirs. He looked at her, his eyes hard. We'll get a room. I'll get supplies. We leave in the morning. I'll take you to Fort Grant. It's 3 more days, but the army will be there. He tied the horse to the rail. Stay here. He went inside. Clara waited on the boardwalk, feeling the eyes of the town on her. A few men lounging outside the saloon looked at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and open speculation. She pulled Colt's duster, which she still wore, tighter around her. A woman came out of the saloon. She was older, her face heavily painted, her red dress faded. She stopped, looked at Clara, and her hard expression softened with a kind of weary pity. You're new, the woman said. Yes, ma'am, we just arrived. The woman glanced up and down the street. You're with the tall man, the one with the scars. Clara nodded. The woman leaned in, her voice low, smelling of whiskey and rosewater. You need to get him and go. The men you're running from? The ones who ambushed the stage? Clara's heart stopped. You know them? I know of them. They come through here. They spend money. They've got friends. She nodded toward the sheriff's office. Big friends. They hear you're in town. They'll come. And that sheriff? He'll ring the dinner bell for him. She patted Clara's arm. Get out, honey. While you can. The woman turned and walked away. Colt came back out. A room key in his hand. 2nd floor. End of the hall. Clara was pale, her eyes wide with a new terror. Colt, a woman just told me. She said they have friends here, that the sheriff will tell them we've come. She watched his face. She saw the change. It was not a big, dramatic shift. It was a simple, terrifying stillness. The warmth she had come to know, the tired patience, the conflicted desire, it all vanished. His gray eyes became flat, cold, and utterly empty. The lines around his mouth hardened. He looked at the sheriff's office, then up at the sun, as if calculating. He was not her protector. He was not her friend. He was a killer. He looked back at her. Go to the room. Lock the door. Put a chair under the knob. Do not open it for anyone but me. I'll be back. Where are you going? She whispered, a new fear twisting in her, not of him, but for him, and, in a strange, dark corner of her heart, a feeling of awe. This was the man who had survived. This was the man who had shot 2 men from the saddle and had not even flinched. He was not just kind. He was deadly. Supplies, he said, his voice still flat. And I need to see a man about a horse. We can't get to the fort on one. He turned and walked toward the general store, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol. He was not walking. He was stalking. He was a wolf in a town of sheep, and he knew the other wolves were coming. Clara went to the room. It was small, stiflingly hot, and contained a rickety bed, a washstand, and a single chair. She locked the door. She pushed the chair under the knob, and she waited. The sun set. The saloon downstairs came alive with the sound of a tinny piano and loud, drunken laughter. She sat on the bed, her hands clasped, listening to every footstep in the hall. She had never been more frightened, and yet she had never felt so strangely safe. The man who was coming back for her was more dangerous than anything that might be hunting her. The knock came 2 hours later. 3 sharp raps. Clara, it's me. She almost sobbed with relief. She pulled the chair away, her hands fumbling with the key. She threw the door open. He stood there, a saddlebag in one hand, his rifle in the other. He stepped inside and pushed the door shut, locking it, replacing the chair. We ride at 4, he said, before the sun. He dropped the saddlebag on the floor and leaned his rifle against the wall. He turned to her. He looked exhausted. The coldness was gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. He looked at her, then at the single, narrow bed. He looked at the floor. "I'll take the floor," he said, unstrapping his bedroll. "No," Clara said. He stopped, his back to her. "Colt." He turned. She was standing by the bed, her hands at her sides. She was not shaking. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "I'm tired of being afraid," she said, her voice clear and strong in the small room. "I'm tired of running from what happened. You told me to live. For me." He watched her, his expression guarded, not understanding. "I want to choose," she said. "I'm not grateful. I'm not scared. Not of you." She took a deep breath. "I don't want to feel broken anymore. I want to feel alive. Please, Colt, I want to feel alive. With you." He stared at her, his throat working. He saw no fear in her eyes. He saw no gratitude. He saw a woman who had walked through hell and was standing on the other side, asking to be seen. He did not move. He was giving her the chance, even now, to turn back, to change her mind. She walked to him. She stood directly in front of him, so close she could feel the heat from his body. She reached up and, with a trembling hand, she touched the scar on his cheek. "You're not taking anything," she whispered. "I'm giving." He closed his eyes. A tremor ran through him. When he opened them, the last of his resistance was gone. He touched her hair, his hand shaking, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Clara," he whispered, her name a prayer. He kissed her. It was not like the kiss in the ravine. There was no hesitation, no question. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was filled with all the wanting he had held back. He picked her up and carried her to the bed. He laid her down as if she were made of spun glass, as if she were sacred. He undressed her, his rough hands unbelievably gentle, his eyes never leaving hers. He unwrapped the bandage on his own shoulder, hissing at the pain, and let it fall away. He touched her, his fingers tracing her collarbone, her shoulder, her arm. He did not touch her with hunger, but with a kind of reverence. He was learning her. He was mapping her body, just as she had mapped his scars. And when he finally came to her, it was slow, hesitant, and so intense she thought she would break. It was a discovery. She cried out, a small, sharp sound. It was not pain. It was release. It was the breaking of the dam, the final letting go of the fear, the shame, the memory of the men at the tree. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. He froze, pulling back, his face stricken with fear. "Did I hurt you?" She shook her head, grabbing his arms, her fingers digging into his skin. "No," she wept. "No, don't stop. Please, don't stop." He looked down at her, at the tears, and he understood. He held her tighter, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her so close there was no space left between them. He held her as she cried, and he did not stop, and he did not let her go. He held her as if he could, with his own body, mend the broken pieces of her soul. The 4 o'clock darkness was thick and cold. Colt was already dressed, checking his revolver by the faint gray light of the window. He moved with absolute silence, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. Clara was awake, her heart pounding a heavy, slow rhythm. She had not truly slept. She had lain in the warmth of his arms, listening to his steady breathing, memorizing the feel of his skin against hers, the solid, safe weight of him. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. "Is it time?" she whispered. He nodded, not turning from the window. He was watching the street, his gaze fixed on the mouth of the alley across the way. Almost, he had restored her. The night they had shared had not been a taking, but a giving. He had, with his hands, his mouth, his body, reaffirmed what he had told her in the ravine, that she was not broken, that she was alive. He had touched her with a tenderness that unmade all the violence that had come before. She felt new, raw, but whole. But a sound drifted up from the street, a single horse, walking slow. Then another. Colt went still. He did not reach for his rifle. He just watched, his body poised. Clara heard a low voice, then the jingle of a spur on the boardwalk below. A heavy boot stepped onto the porch of the inn. "They're here," Colt said. His voice was flat. "How do you know?" Clara whispered, pulling on her dress, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. "That's Brody's laugh," he said. "He's bringing them." A heavy fist pounded on the inn's main door downstairs. "Colt Mercer, I know you're in there. Come on out, and the sheriff might just let you ride." Clara looked at Colt, her eyes wide with fear. The cold, deadly stillness was back. He was the man from the gunfight. The man from the store. "The back," he whispered. He grabbed his rifle and the saddlebag. He looked at the window. It overlooked a narrow, trash-filled alley and a low shed roof 2 floors down. "It's the only way." He went to the window and eased it open. The noise of the street was louder now. Men were yelling. "Jed, he's up here! Room 6! It was the sheriff's voice. Colt threw the saddlebag out onto the shed roof. It landed with a soft thud. He slung his rifle over his back. "Clara, you first. It's not a hard drop. I'll be right behind you." She looked down. It looked a long way, but the sound of boots pounding up the stairs was closer. She put her leg over the sill. "Go!" he urged. She slid out, her hands gripping the sill, and dropped. She landed hard on the shingles, her ankles jarring. She scrambled to her feet. Colt was right behind her, landing like a cat, his hand already on her arm. "This way! Move!" A shot exploded from their room, the window shattering, glass raining down into the alley. They ran, hunched low, across the sloping roof. At the end, a rickety ladder led down to the ground. Colt went first, dropping the last few feet. He held his arms up for her. She slid, and he caught her, setting her on her feet. The livery was just behind the inn. "The horses," he said, pulling her into the deeper shadow of the stable. "They'll be watching it," she breathed, her heart hammering. "They'll be watching the front. Brody's lazy." He was right. The stable was dark and quiet, smelling of hay and manure. He had already paid the stable boy last night, and their 2 horses, his bay and a sturdy mare he had bought, were saddled and waiting. He led them silently out the back gate, into the darkness of the open lots behind the town. They did not mount. He led the horses for a 1/4 of a mile, keeping the low buildings between them and the main street. Only when the last shack was behind them, and the open plains stretched out, did he stop. "Get up," he said. He swung into his saddle, and Clara mounted the mare. She was a decent rider, from her years on the farm. "We ride for Fort Grant," he said, his voice hard. "We don't stop. We don't look back." He kicked his horse into a run, and she urged the mare to follow, the sound of their hoofbeats muffled by the dusty ground. They rode hard, the gray light of dawn chasing them. They did not stop until the sun was high, and Clearwater was just a smudge of dirty buildings on the horizon. Colt finally reined in, letting the horses breathe. He scanned their back trail. "Nothing. We're clear," he said, his voice still tight. Clara was breathing hard, her hands aching from gripping the reins. She had run. She had run from the fire. She had been dragged from the stagecoach. She had just run from the inn. She was so tired of running. "No," she said. Colt turned, his expression questioning. "No, what? We have to keep moving." "No!" she said again, her voice stronger. She looked at him, her chin up. The terror of the morning was fading, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "I'm not running anymore. Clara, this isn't a choice. Those men, that whole town, they won't stop. They'll come for us. Brody can't afford to let me live, and Jed won't let you go." "And then what?" she demanded, her voice rising. "We get to Fort Grant, and we wait for them to find us? Or we run to Oregon, and we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? I spend the rest of my life waiting for that red-bearded man to walk through a door." She shook her head. "A fierce, final motion. They killed those people on the stage. They hurt me. They'll do it again. That woman in the saloon. She was afraid. Everyone in that town is afraid. I won't be." Colt stared at her. This was not the trembling girl he had cut from the tree. This was not the woman who had cried in his arms. This was someone new, forged in the fire of the last few days. He saw the iron in her spine. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I'm saying I want to stop them. Not just for me, for the next woman. For that woman in the saloon. I want to stop them." A slow, hard smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was a smile of pure, quiet admiration. "That's a hard trail. Clara, it likely gets us both killed." "Running gets us killed. Just slower," she countered. "You said it yourself. You're a man who brings trouble, but you're also a man who knows how to end it. You didn't run from those two men in the canyon." He was silent for a long moment, studying her. He was weighing the odds, the danger, but he was also looking at her, seeing her, and he knew she was right. She would never be free until this was done. And, he admitted to himself, neither would he. He could not run and leave this kind of evil at his back. "All right," he said. "Not Fort Grant. I know a place. An old mining camp in the Cimarron Breaks. It's hard country. But I have friends there. If we're going to make a stand, we'll make it there." He turned his horse, not east toward the fort, but north, toward the high, broken ridges. "Let's ride. They rode for 2 days, pushing hard, into a landscape that looked like the world had broken apart. Deep canyons, high mesas, and jagged rock formations. It was a place to get lost. It was a place to hide. The mining camp was not a camp at all, but a small, hidden town clinging to the side of a canyon. Tents and rough-hewn shacks were scattered among the rocks. Men moved about. Hard-looking men with pistols on their hips, but they were working, digging, sifting. As Colt and Clara rode in, a tall man with a dark beard and a missing ear stepped out of a larger shack, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. He watched them approach. Colt reined in. "Nate," he said. "The man." Nate squinted. His hard face broke into a slow grin. "Colt Mercer. I'll be damned. I heard you were dead. Or worse, farming." "Tried both," Colt said, swinging down. "Neither took—" He walked to Nate, and the two men clasped hands, their arms gripping each other's forearms in a bond that went deeper than friendship. It was the grip of men who had seen war together. Nate's eyes moved to Clara as she dismounted, his gaze sharp, assessing. "You found trouble, Colt, or it found you." "Her name is Clara," Colt said, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "She's with me. And the trouble is a man named Jed, runs a gang of road agents out of Clearwater." Nate's smile vanished. "Jedediah Stone. We know him. He thinks these hills are his. He and his men are poison." He looked at Clara, his expression softening to respect. "You crossed Jed, ma'am. You're breathing. That's a start." "He crossed her," Colt said, his voice cold. "We're here to finish it." They went inside. The shack was a makeshift saloon and headquarters. Men sat at tables, but they were not the drunken, shiftless men of Clearwater. They were watchful, tough. Half lawmen, half bandits. Just as Colt had said, men who lived by their own code in a land the law had forgotten. Colt explained. The stagecoach, the ambush, the sheriff. Clara. Nate listened, his face grim. "Brody's always been a snake, and Jed's gotten bold. He's got maybe 15, 20 men with him. They're fast, and they know the country. But," he said, a hard light in his eyes, "so do we. We need a plan," Colt said. "They'll be hunting us. Brody will have told them which way we ran." "We don't wait for them to hunt," Nate said. "We set a trap. There's a box canyon south of here. One way in, one way out. We spread the word." He looked at one of the men at a table. "Silas, you ride to Clearwater. You get drunk. You tell anyone who'll listen you saw a man matching Colt's description, with a dark-haired woman, hiding out in Whisper Canyon." Silas, a small, wiry man, nodded. "They'll bite. We'll set men on the ridge," Nate continued. "We hit them from 3 sides when they're deep in the canyon. It's a killing box." Clara felt a chill. They were talking about killing men with such cold, practiced efficiency. But then she remembered the man on the stagecoach, the woman in gray, her own terror. This was not murder. This was justice. "I want to help," Clara said. Both men turned to look at her. "Clara," Colt started, his voice gentle. "No," she said, cutting him off. "I am not hiding in a tent while you fight for me. I am the reason they are coming. I will be part of this. Teach me." Nate looked at Colt, a single eyebrow raised. Colt looked at Clara, at the unbending will in her eyes. He nodded slowly. "All right, but you'll do exactly as I say." The training began that afternoon. Colt took her to a flat area behind the camp, away from the others. He handed her a Winchester rifle. It was heavy, the wood smooth, the metal cold. "You know how to shoot?" "A shotgun," she said. "My father taught me. For rabbits. But it's been a long time. This is different. It'll kick, but it's true." He showed her how to load it, how to work the lever, how to sight down the barrel. "Don't pull the trigger. Squeeze it. Slow. Let the gun surprise you." He set up a tin can on a rock 50 yards away. Clara raised the rifle. It was so heavy. Her arms shook. She closed her eyes, took a breath, aimed, and squeezed. The explosion was deafening. The stock slamming into her shoulder so hard it made her cry out. The shot kicked up dust 10 feet to the left of the can. "Again," Colt said, his voice patient. She tried again, and again. Her shoulder was on fire, a new, massive bruise forming. She missed every time. Frustration and tears welled in her eyes. "I can't." "You can." Colt stepped behind her. He put his arms around her, his hands over hers, one on the stock, one on the forestock, arranging her grip. His chest was solid against her back. "Breathe," he whispered, his chin resting near her temple. "Don't fight it. Become part of it. See the target. See nothing else." His presence calmed her. His strength flowed into her. She sighted. She squeezed. The rifle fired. The tin can jumped off the rock. A slow smile spread across her face. She looked back at him, her eyes bright. He did not smile, but his eyes were full of a deep, quiet admiration. "Again," he said. She trained for 2 days. She shot until her shoulder was a mass of purple and black, until her arms ached so much she could barely lift them. But she did not stop, and she did not miss. She became steady. She learned to load, fire, and reload, her movements becoming smoother, less panicked. Colt watched her. He saw the transformation. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a grim, hard resolve. The woman he had cut from the tree was gone. In her place was a woman who was choosing to fight for her own life. The night before the trap was set, the camp was quiet, tense. Silas had returned. The bait was taken. Jed and his men would ride at dawn. Clara and Colt were in the small tent Nate had given them. A single lantern cast a warm, golden glow. Colt was cleaning his rifle, his hands moving with practiced, methodical grace. Clara sat on the bedroll, rubbing her sore shoulder. She had done all she could. Now, there was only the waiting. Colt finished, setting the rifle aside. He looked at her, at the exhaustion in her face, the bruising on her shoulder. He sat beside her, his thigh pressing against hers. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. They sat in silence for a long time. The intimacy between them was no longer new or fragile. It was a deep, solid thing, built of shared violence, shared fear, and a shared resolve. "You've done well, Clara," he said, his voice low. "I'm still afraid," she confessed. "Only a fool wouldn't be." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "After this, when this is done, He stopped. "What?" she asked. He looked at her, his gray eyes raw with an emotion she had never seen in him. "You make me want to be the kind of man who could stay in one place, the kind of man who builds a fence." She smiled, a small, tender smile. She reached up and touched the scar on his cheek, her fingers tracing the old wound. "Colt Mercer," she whispered, "you don't need a fence to stay. You just stay." She leaned her head against his good shoulder. "You already are that man. You just needed a reason." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He kissed her, not with the desperate passion of the inn, but with a deep, bone-weary tenderness. It was a kiss of promise, of a future. It was a prayer in the dark, before the war. The canyon was a gray, misty throat in the pre-dawn light. Clara was positioned high on the northern ridge, tucked into a narrow cleft in the rock. She had a good view of the canyon floor, and she had a clear line of retreat. Colt had put her here. She was part of the trap, but she was also as safe as he could make her. Colt, Nate, and 10 other men were hidden along the canyon rims, rifles ready. Clara waited. Her rifle felt cold and heavy in her hands. Her heart was a bird trapped in her chest. Then she heard them, the jingle of harness, the clop of hooves on rock. They rode in, shadows in the morning gloom. 15, 16, 17 men. She saw the leader, red-bearded, sitting tall in the saddle. Jedediah Stone. A cold, pure hatred filled her, burning away the fear. They rode deeper into the trap, their eyes scanning the rocks, looking for her. Nate fired the first shot. It was the signal. The canyon erupted. Gunfire echoed from both ridges. A deafening, terrifying roar. Men shouted. Horses screamed. 2 outlaws fell from their saddles before they even knew what was happening. Clara raised her rifle. She found a target, a man dismounting, trying to take cover. She aimed. She squeezed. She missed, the shot sparking off the rock near his head. He scrambled behind a boulder. The outlaws were trapped, fighting back, firing up at the ridges. Bullets whined and ricocheted. Clara saw Colt, far down the opposite ridge, moving, firing with calm precision. He shot a man, worked the lever, shot another. He was the deadly man from Clearwater, a force of nature. A man near the canyon mouth was trying to get his horse turned around. He saw Clara. He raised his pistol and fired at her. The bullet hit the rock just inches from her head, sending stone chips stinging into her face. She cried out, ducking back. He was reloading, shouting to another man. He was trying to get to her. He was going to climb. He started scrambling up the rocks toward her position. He was clumsy, but he was coming. Clara's fear turned to ice. "No," she whispered. She stepped out from the cleft. She raised the rifle. She did not aim for the tin can. She aimed for the center of his chest. She saw his face, twisted in a snarl. She breathed out. She squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The man stopped climbing. He looked down at his chest, a dark stain spreading, a look of pure surprise on his face. He toppled backward, rolling down the rocks to the canyon floor. She had done it. She had killed a man. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel sick. She felt still. She reloaded. The fight was furious but short, trapped and outnumbered. The outlaws fell. Then she saw Colt cry out. He staggered, clutching his side, but he did not fall. He leaned against a rock, raised his rifle, and shot the man who had wounded him. "Colt!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the gunfire. The last few outlaws threw down their guns, their hands in the air. The fight was over. Clara scrambled down the ridge, sliding, falling, running toward Colt. He was standing, leaning heavily on his rifle, his face pale. Nate was already at his side. "It's my ribs," Colt gasped, his hand pressed to his side, blood leaking through his fingers. "Same damn side." "You're lucky," Nate said, ripping open Colt's shirt. In and out. Went clean through the muscle. "You'll live, you stubborn bastard." Clara reached him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch him. "You're hurt." He looked at her, his eyes pained but clear. He saw her face, streaked with gunpowder and dirt, her eyes wide. "You?" he asked. "I'm all right," she breathed. "I'm all right." He nodded, relieved. His gaze went back to the canyon floor. Nate and his men were tying up the prisoners. The dead were still... Colt's face hardened. He pushed away from the rock, ignoring Nate's protest. He stalked forward, his revolver appearing in his hand. He looked at the bodies, counting. "Where is he?" he growled. "Where's Jed?" Nate cursed, looking around. "He's gone." Must have bolted when the shooting started. His horse is gone." Colt's face became a mask of pure, cold rage. The man from Clearwater was back, and he was terrifying. "He's gone. Colt, you're bleeding. We'll get him," Nate said. "No," Colt snarled. He started to walk toward his horse. "I'll get him. I'll hunt him down. He doesn't get to live. Not after what he did to her. Not after this." This was not justice. This was vengeance. This was the rage from the man who had lost Elspeth. The man who believed he was cursed to lose everyone he loved. He was going to ride into that rage and never come back. "Colt!" Clara cried. He did not stop. She ran, grabbing his arm. He tried to shake her off, his eyes wild, but she held on, stepping in front of him, planting herself in his path. "Colt, no, stop. Get out of my way. Clara, this isn't finished." "It is," she said, her voice desperate, but firm. She grabbed his face, her hands on his rough cheeks, forcing him to look at her. His wound was bleeding freely, his shirt soaked, but he did not seem to feel it. "He's gone," she said. "Let him go. It doesn't matter." "It matters," he hissed. "He hurt you. He's still out there." "You won," she said, her eyes boring into his. "Look, you won. I'm alive. I'm here." She pressed her forehead against his, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I don't need you to kill him for me. I need you to live for me. You already saved me." He stared into her eyes. The fire in his own wavered. Her words cut through the rage, through the pain, through the past. "You already saved me." He was not avenging Elspeth. He was protecting Clara, and she was here. She was safe. She was strong. The gun in his hand felt heavy. The rage drained away, leaving him exhausted, wounded, and trembling. He let the revolver fall from his fingers, and his arms came up, wrapping around her, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him upright. He buried his face in her hair. "Clara," he whispered, his voice broken. She held him, her arms tight around his back, supporting his weight. "I've got you," she whispered, echoing the words he had spoken to her in the ravine. "I've got you. It's over." He had been too stubborn. The rage that had driven him to hunt Jed had kept him on his feet. But the moment Clara's words broke through, the strength had vanished. The bullet had gone clean through, Nate said, but it had torn the old scar tissue on his ribs, and the wound was angry, ragged, and deep. They got him back to the mining camp, half carrying him, half listening to his cursed, muttered protests. Nate and his men had dealt with the prisoners and the dead. A grim, efficient cleanup, but Colt was Clara's responsibility. She took him to their tent. She boiled water. She found clean cloths. She washed the wound, her hands steady, her face a mask of concentration. The bullet had passed through the flesh of his side, just below his ribs. It was not a fatal wound, but it was a bad one. Nate had looked at it, his face grim. "It'll poison him if we're not careful," he'd said. "That kind of wound festers." It did. By the next morning, he was burning. The fever took him. The strong, silent man who had pulled her from terror, who had held her with such tenderness, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man tossing on the narrow cot, his skin slick with sweat, his eyes closed or staring, unseeing. At the canvas roof, Clara did not leave him. She sat on a small crate beside the cot, a bucket of cool water at her feet. She bathed his face. She forced sips of water between his cracked lips. She listened. In his delirium, the walls he had built around his past crumbled. He was not in the tent. He was somewhere else, a long time ago. "Elspeth," he muttered, his voice hoarse, his head twisting on the cot. "The smoke! God, the smoke! I smell it!" Clara froze, the wet cloth in her hand. Elspeth. He had never spoken a name. "Shouldn't have left," he groaned, his hand clenching the rough blanket. "My fault. I left you alone. Knew they were in the county. Knew it. Just for supplies. Just for a day." Clara sat, her heart aching, as the story poured out of him in broken, fevered pieces. He had tried to settle. He had built a cabin. He had loved a woman. They came through, drifters, not Jed, just hungry, vicious. He winced, a tremor running through his body. The fire, God, Elspeth, I'm sorry, I wasn't there, I wasn't strong enough, I'm sorry. He grew quiet for a moment, and Clara wiped the sweat from his forehead. His skin was fire. Found them, he whispered, his voice suddenly cold. The chilling, flat tone she recognized, the voice of the killer. Found all 3 of them. It didn't help. She was still gone. Still gone. He fell into a fitful, moaning sleep. Clara sat back, the cloth dripping onto her skirt. She finally understood. She understood the fences he had tried to build, the farm he had abandoned. She understood the deep, abiding guilt that rode him, the reason he flinched from her touch, the reason he had been so determined to protect her. He had not just been saving her from the outlaws. He had been trying to save himself from his own past. He had been given a second chance, a chance to save the woman he had failed. He cried out again, his hand shooting out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was weak, but desperate. His eyes were open, but they saw the past. Don't go, he pleaded, his voice a raw whisper. It's not safe. I can't lose you too. Clara realized, with a sudden, painful clarity, that he was not speaking to Elspeth anymore. He was speaking to her. She looked down at the man who had been her rock, her savior. He was shattered. He believed he was a curse. He believed that his love, his presence, brought ruin to the women he cared for. He had not been fighting for justice in that canyon. He had been fighting his own ghost, and his rage at Jed was the rage he felt for himself. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sharp. She turned her hand in his grip, lacing her fingers with his. His hand was rough, hot and damp. She leaned in close, her hair brushing his cheek, her lips near his ear. I'm right here, Colt, she whispered, her voice fierce and tender. I'm not leaving. You're not cursed. Do you hear me? You are not a curse. He quieted, his breathing still ragged, but his body eased, as if her words were a cooling balm. You didn't fail, she whispered, the tears rolling down her cheeks and dropping onto his shoulder. You are not a bad man. You are the best man I have ever known. She stayed like that for hours, all through the night, as the fever raged. She held his hand and she talked. She told him about her father, about her brother, Thomas. She told him about the first moment she saw him, a tall shadow, how she had been afraid. And she told him how his voice, his steady, patient voice, had cut through her terror. You're my hope, Colt, she murmured, her voice growing hoarse, her own body aching with fatigue. But she would not stop. You're not my guilt. You're not my past. You are my hope. You saved me. You keep saving me. Now you have to let me save you. You have to stay. You have to come back. She did not know if he heard, but she kept talking. She was not just fighting the fever in his body. She was fighting the poison in his soul. The fever broke on the third morning. Clara had fallen asleep, her head resting on the edge of the cot, her hand still holding his. She woke to a sound, a faint shift. She lifted her head. He was awake. His eyes were open, and they were clear. The fever was gone. He was looking at her. He looked ruined. His face was gaunt, his beard matted, his lips cracked. But he was himself. He was sane. And he was looking at her with an expression of such raw, unshielded vulnerability that it stopped her breath. He knew. He knew what he had said. He knew she had heard. The last wall was gone. Clara, he whispered. His voice was a dry rasp. She could not speak. She just looked at him, her heart in her eyes. His face crumpled. The stoic, hard man who had faced gunfights and dust storms, who had held her as she wept, finally broke. A single hard tear cut a path through the grime on his cheek. Then another. His shoulders began to shake, a deep, silent, agonizing tremor. He tried to turn his face away, a last, desperate instinct to hide his shame, his weakness. No, Clara whispered. She moved, sitting on the edge of the cot, and put her arms around him, pulling his head against her chest. It's all right. It's all right. I've got you. He wept. He held on to her, his hands clutching her dress, his face buried against her, and he wept for the first time since he had buried Elspeth. He wept for the woman he had lost, for the guilt he had carried, for the violence he had committed. He wept for the fear of losing Clara, and for the overwhelming, terrifying relief that she was here, alive, and holding him. Clara held him, her own tears falling freely into his hair. She cried for him. She cried for her parents, for her brother. She cried for the dead woman she had never known, but whose ghost she had been fighting. She cried for the hardness of the world and for this one, single, broken, beautiful man. They held each other, two survivors, finally free from the guilt that had haunted them. The past was not gone. It was not forgotten. But it was, at last, just the past. They were weeping, holding each other, finally and completely free. They stayed like that for a long time, until the tent was filled with the quiet morning light, and there were no tears left to cry. He was weak, but the fever was gone. For 3 days, Clara nursed him, this time with a new, quiet intimacy. She fed him broth. She changed the bandage on his side, which was finally healing clean. They spoke little, but they no longer needed to. He would watch her, his eyes following her as she moved, a deep, quiet gratitude in his gaze. And she would smile, a real smile, a smile that reached her eyes. On the 4th day, Colt was sitting up, his back against a crate. When Nate ducked into the tent, his face was grim. "Colt, Clara, bad news." Colt immediately tensed, his hand moving to where his pistol would normally be. "What is it?" "Jedediah Stone," Nate said. "He's not running. He's regrouping. One of my scouts just rode in. Jed's met up with the Taggart brothers. They run a horse-thieving ring 2 counties over. They're old friends. He's got at least 30 men now, and they're riding this way. They're coming for the camp. He's coming to burn us out." Colt swore, his face hardening. He pushed himself to his feet, wavering for a second before he caught his balance. He was weak, but the deadly stillness was back. "How long?" Colt asked. "A day, maybe 2. They're not hurrying. They think they've got us cornered." "We have to ride," Colt said, looking at Clara. "We have to get you out of here." "No," Clara said, her voice quiet, but absolute. Both men looked at her. "We're done running," she said. She looked at Colt, her eyes steady. "You're not fighting your ghosts anymore, and I am not the woman you tied to a tree. He is coming for us. He's coming for this camp, for the men who helped us. We will not let him." She looked at Nate. "You said he was poison. You don't cure poison by running from it. You cut it out." Nate grinned, a slow, wolfish expression. "She's got sand. Colt, more than you." Colt looked at Clara. He saw the woman who had held him as he broke. He saw the woman who had faced her own killer. He saw his partner. He nodded once. "All right. We don't run. We fight." "But not here," Nate said. "This camp's no good. It's too open. They'll slaughter us." "No," Colt said, a slow, calculating light in his eyes. "Not here. We hit them before they get here. I know this country. There's a ravine, about 10 miles east, narrow, boxed in. It's the only way they'll come through if they want to surprise us. We can set a trap." "Like Whisper Canyon?" Nate asked. "Bigger," Colt said. He was walking, pacing the small tent, his strength returning with the thrill of the fight. "We'll need the explosives. From the mine. All of it." Nate's eyes lit up. "An avalanche. We bury them." "No," Colt said. "Not an avalanche. Too messy, too unpredictable. We flush them. We cause chaos. We hit them when they break." He looked at Clara. "It's a risk. I'll have to get in close." "I'll have to set the charges myself." "We'll do it together," she said. This time, he did not argue. The ravine was a deep, jagged scar in the earth, its walls steep and treacherous. Nate and his men were hidden, scattered along the south rim, a good 300 yards from the canyon floor. Colt and Clara were on the north rim, on a high, flat ledge that gave them a perfect view of the opposite side and the ravine below. It was Colt's old position, his sniper's perch. "You stay here," he said, checking his rifle, then handing it to her. "This is your spot. You watch my back. You watch the south rim. You are the lookout. You see anything Nate misses, you fire one shot into the air. You see anyone coming for me, you fire two." "What about you?" she asked, her hand steady on the rifle. "Jed's camp is at the mouth of the ravine. They're resting their horses, getting ready for the final push. They'll have sentries, but they're arrogant. They think we're trapped." He patted the heavy canvas bag at his feet. It was filled with sticks of dynamite and long fuses. "I'm going in, along the rim. I'll set the charges on the cliff face, right above their camp. When they ride into the ravine in the morning, Nate will give the signal. I'll light the fuse. The blast will scatter them, push them right into Nate's guns. We'll have them trapped between the explosion and the ridge." "It's too dangerous," she whispered, her hand on his arm. He was still pale, his side tightly bound. "It's the only way," he said. He leaned in and kissed her. A hard, quick kiss. It was not a kiss of passion, or even tenderness. It was a kiss of partnership, of a shared fate. "Watch my back, Clara. Always," she whispered. He was gone, a shadow melting into the rocks, the heavy bag over his shoulder. Clara lay on the rock, the rifle stock warm against her cheek. She watched the ravine. She watched the night. She did not sleep. Her body was strung tight, every nerve ending alive. She was not the woman from the stagecoach. She was a sentry. She was a hunter. Dawn came, cold and gray, far below, at the mouth of the ravine. She could see Jed's camp. Men were moving, saddling horses. They were laughing. Then she saw movement on the far cliff, high above the camp. It was Colt. He was a tiny figure, moving slowly, carefully, along a narrow ledge. He was planting the charges. Her heart was in her throat, but her hands were steady. She watched him. She watched everything. She saw him finish. He planted the last charge and began to move back, unspooling the long fuse. He was almost clear. A man emerged from a tent below. He stretched, looked around, and then, for no reason, his eyes went to the cliff. He froze. He pointed. He shouted. Colt was seen. Men boiled out of the camp, rifles appearing. They started firing, the bullets sparking off the rock around Colt. He was trapped. A man, one of the Taggart brothers by his size, started scrambling up the rocks, taking a side path, trying to get above Colt, trying to flank him. Clara's world narrowed. There was the man. There was her rifle. There was Colt. She did not hesitate. She did not think about the man she had killed in Whisper Canyon. She did not think about the man's face. She thought about Colt's life. She breathed out. She aimed. She squeezed. The rifle slammed into her shoulder. Across the ravine, the man climbing the rocks jerked, as if struck by an invisible fist. He hung there for a second, then toppled, falling, bouncing off the rocks, and landing in a still heap on the canyon floor. Her shot had drawn the attention of the camp. Two men turned, firing up at her ledge. The bullets whined, centimeters from her head. She pulled back, her heart hammering. Colt was moving. He had his chance. He scrambled to the end of the fuse, pulled a match, and struck it. A small, bright flare. He lit the fuse. "Nate, now!" he roared, his voice barely audible. On the far ridge, Nate's rifle cracked. It was the signal. His men opened fire, pouring a deadly rain of lead into the disorganized camp. The outlaws were caught between the snipers on the ridge and the burning, hissing fuse on the cliff. They panicked. "The fuse!" Jed roared. "Get the fuse!" But it was too late. Colt was running, scrambling back toward Clara's position. As the explosion rocked the world, it was not a single blast, but a series of them. Walking along the cliff face, a wall of rock, dirt, and fire erupted. The sound was a physical blow, a punch to the chest. The ground beneath Clara's hands jumped. The explosion tore the camp apart. Tents vanished. Horses screamed. The force of the blast threw men like dolls. Chaos, pure, absolute chaos. The outlaws who survived were broken. They ran, not for cover, but for their lives, scrambling madly up the ravine, away from the fire. Right into Nate's guns. The fight was over. It was not a battle. It was a rout. Clara was on her feet, her ears ringing, staring at the smoke and dust. A hand grabbed her arm. It was Colt. He was covered in dirt, his face streaked with soot, a cut bleeding on his forehead. He was grinning, a wild, fierce, beautiful grin. He was alive. She threw her arms around his neck, and he lifted her off her feet, his arms like steel bands around her, his laughter loud in her ear. He set her down, but he did not let her go. He held her face, his thumbs wiping the dust from her cheeks. "You saved me," he breathed, his grin fading to a look of awe. "I saw it. That shot. You saved my life." "You saved mine," she whispered, her hand coming up to cover his. "I guess we're even." He laughed again, a real, free laugh. The sound of a man who had finally laid his ghosts to rest. Below them, Nate and his men were rounding up the survivors. Jedediah Stone and the Taggart brothers were among the dead. The poison was cut out. Colt took her hand. His was rough and calloused. Hers was smaller, but just as steady. He did not say anything. He just held on, and they started to walk away from the ravine, away from the smoke, away from the death. They walked, hand in hand, toward the rising sun. They were, at last, victorious. Weeks later, the world was no longer red rock and gunpowder. It was green. Colt had known of this place, a high mountain valley he had seen once, years ago, and kept locked in his memory as a kind of what if. It was a deep, quiet crease in the land, protected on all sides by high ridges, with a creek that ran clear and cold all year. Here, they stopped. The past was a brutal, screaming storm that had finally passed them by, leaving an exhausted, clean silence in its wake. They were miles from Clearwater, miles from any trail, miles from everything that had tried to kill them. They built the cabin together. It was not the cabin Colt had built for Elspeth, the one he had built with a farmer's reluctant duty. He built this one with a survivor's fierce joy. He cut the pine himself, his axe blows echoing in the valley, a sound of creation, not destruction. His wound healed, the long scar on his side joining the others, a new line on the map of his life. Clara worked beside him. She chinked the logs with mud and moss, her hands, once torn by ropes, now strong and sure. She was not the woman from the stagecoach. She was not the trembling victim from the tree. She was the woman who had held him as he broke, the woman who had shot a man from a high ridge to save his life. When the cabin was done, with its single room, its stone fireplace, and its solid, heavy door, they began to build a life. Colt built furniture. He was clumsy at first, his large, calloused hands more used to a rifle stock or a horse's reins than a carving knife. But he was patient. He built a table, solid and square. He built 2 chairs, sturdy and plain. He built a bed frame, sanding the wood smooth so it would not snag or splinter. His hands, which had taken life, were now dedicated to comfort. Clara planted flowers. She found wild columbine and Indian paintbrush up on the ridge and transplanted them to the patch of dark earth by the cabin door. She planted them in memory of her mother, who had always kept a garden. She planted them for the future. It was an act of faith, a belief that they would be here long enough to see them bloom. They lived quietly. The days fell into a simple, healing rhythm. He would hunt, returning with a rabbit or a deer, and she would cook. She would mend their clothes, and he would chop wood. They spoke, but not always. They had no need for constant words. They had forged a bond in silence and violence that was now settling into a comfortable, domestic peace. The nightmares did not vanish all at once. Sometimes, Clara would wake in the night, her heart pounding, the smell of smoke in her nostrils. But she was not in Kansas, and she was not at the tree. She was in the cabin, in the bed Colt had built, and his arm was a heavy, warm weight across her waist. He would stir, his breathing deep and steady, and she would lay her hand over his, lacing her fingers with his, and the fear would recede. Sometimes, he would be the one to wake, his body rigid, his hand reaching for the pistol he no longer kept by the bed. He would be in the burned-out shell of Elspeth's cabin, or on the ledge with bullets sparking around him. Then Clara would touch his face, her hand gentle on his scarred cheek, and she would whisper his name. "Colt, you're here. You're home." And he would come back to her, his breath shuddering out, and he would pull her against him, holding her as if she were his last and only anchor in the world. They were two broken, scarred people who were, piece by piece, making each other whole. One night, weeks had turned into months. The sharp edge of summer was softening toward autumn. Clara was standing by the fire, a stew simmering in the pot. Colt had been out checking his traps and was late. She had spent the afternoon working on something for herself. She had traded a few pelts with a traveling trapper, a man Nate had sent by, for needles, thread, and several yards of blue cotton cloth. She had sewn herself a new dress. It was not black. It was not the torn, filthy garment she had worn for so long. It was the color of the valley sky just before dusk. She had bathed in the creek, the water so cold it made her gasp. But it felt good, clean. Her hair, which had been matted with blood and pine sap, was growing long again. It fell past her shoulders in a dark, clean wave. She stood by the fire, the heat warm on her face, and for the first time since her family had died, she felt whole. She felt like herself. The door opened, letting in a swirl of cool evening air. Colt stood there, his rifle in one hand, 2 rabbits in the other. He stopped, his eyes falling on her. He just stared. Clara's hands went to the dress, a flicker of self-consciousness in her. "It's new, He dropped the rabbits by the door and crossed the room in 2 long strides. He stopped in front of her, his gaze traveling from her clean hair to her face, to the simple blue dress, to her bare feet on the wooden floor. He reached out, his rough forefinger gently touching her cheek, as if he was not sure she was real. His voice was a low, rough whisper. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known." He was not looking at her with desire, though that was there, a quiet, steady burn in his eyes. He was looking at her with a kind of reverence, a profound, aching admiration. He saw the woman who had survived the fire, the ambush, the gunfight, the terror. He saw the woman who had planted flowers in the dirt and who had held his hand while he wept. Tears pricked her eyes, and she smiled. He had never said the words, not in the cabin, not in the camp, not even in the height of their intimacy. He had shown her, in 1,000 small ways, but the words themselves were a fence he had not yet been able to build. He had been a man who believed love led to loss. He cupped her face, his hands gentle. "I lost Elspeth," he said, his voice thick. I thought I was a poison, that I would never, that I didn't deserve." He stopped, his throat working. "But you, Clara, you're not like her. You're not just hope. You're life. You're as strong as this valley. You're as strong as the rock." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I love you, Clara." He said it. The words were simple, spoken, and absolute. The last ghost in the room vanished, gone for good. Clara's tears finally spilled over, but they were not tears of fear or grief. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling his face down to hers. "And I love you, Colt Mercer," she whispered against his lips. "I love you." He kissed her, and it was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the inn, or the tender, healing kiss of the tent. It was the kiss of a husband and a wife. It was the kiss of 2 people who had found their home. Later that night, they lay in the bed he had built, the fire burning low, casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls. They were quiet, comfortable in the new, spoken truth of their love. Clara was nestled against his side, her head on his shoulder, her fingers tracing the long, pale scar that ran down his ribs. He was half asleep, his hand tangled in her hair. "Colt," she said softly. She hesitated. She had been counting the days. She had been a farm girl. She knew the rhythms of a woman's body. And hers was late. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her. He opened his eyes, sensing the change in her. His gaze instantly sharp and focused. "What is it? You all right?" She looked at him, her face pale in the firelight. I'm late," she whispered. He stared at her, not understanding. "Late? For what?" "My cycle," she said, her voice barely audible. It's been 5 weeks. Almost 6. I'm never late." They both froze. The silence in the cabin was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. A child, a baby, the consequence of their night in Clearwater, of their nights here, a life created from the ashes of their old ones. Colt's expression was unreadable. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, his back to her. He rested his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. A cold fear gripped Clara. It was too much. The world was too hard. They were just finding their footing. A child was a terror, a vulnerability she could not bear. He was a man who had lost everything. How could he? He did not speak for a full minute. Clara's heart hammered, a sick, cold dread. Then his shoulders began to shake. She thought he was weeping again, that he was breaking under this new, terrifying weight. He turned. His face was a mask of utter, terrified, disbelieving joy. He was smiling, a slow, wide, beautiful smile that crinkled the scars around his eyes. He was crying, but he was smiling. "Clara," he breathed. She stared at him, her own fear warring with the impossible hope in his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, his hands spreading wide on her back. "A baby," he whispered into her hair. "Our baby." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, his smile fading slightly as he saw her fear. "It's all right," he said, his voice dropping, becoming the steady, calm voice that had cut through her panic at the tree. "It's all right to be scared. I'm scared, too. I'm terrified." He took her hand and placed it on her stomach. "But, Clara, look at us. We're here. We're alive. We're strong." He touched his chest. "My father used to say that life was just survival. But it's not. It's more." A slow, watery smile finally broke through her own fear. Fear and joy, tangled so tightly together she could not tell which was which. A child, a new life, a new beginning. A week later, a rider came. It was Silas, the man from Nate's camp. He rode in leading a pack mule, a gift from Nate, sacks of flour, coffee, sugar, and a bolt of wool cloth. Colt and Clara met him by the creek, Colt's hand resting near his pistol, his instincts still sharp. But Silas was smiling. "Nate sends his best," Silas said, dismounting. "Figured you two might be running low." "We're grateful," Colt said, his shoulders relaxing. "Water your horse. You'll stay for dinner." "Can't," Silas said. "But I have news. Nate thought you'd want to know. The last of the Taggart clan. The one that got away in the explosion. Marshall caught him near Santa Fe, trying to sell a stolen horse." Clara's breath hitched. "They tried him," Silas continued. "He talked. He told them everything. About Jed, about Brody, about the stagecoach, about all of it." Silas spat on the ground. "They hanged him 2 days ago. Brody's been arrested by the marshals. Clearwater's getting a new sheriff." He looked at Clara, his hat in his hands. "It's over, ma'am, for good. The past is closed." Clara stood there, the sunlight warm on her face, the sound of the creek bubbling nearby. Closed. The last ghost. The final lock. It was done. She nodded, a deep, profound wave of relief washing through her, so strong it made her knees weak. Colt's hand found hers, his grip warm and solid. That evening, the air was cool and crisp, carrying the first sharp scent of autumn, of wood smoke, of pine. The sun was a brilliant, fiery orange, sinking behind the western ridge, painting the high clouds in strokes of purple and pink. Clara stood on the small porch Colt had built, wrapped in a quilt, watching the sky change. The valley was quiet, peaceful. The door opened behind her. Colt stepped out. He came up behind her, and she leaned back as his arms wrapped around her from behind. He crossed his arms over her stomach, his hands gently protective, his chin resting on her shoulder. They stood together, two scarred survivors, watching the day end. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he murmured, his breath warm on her ear. She leaned her head back, resting it on his chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart against her. The man who had been a dangerous stranger was now her home. The man she had feared was now her safety. "Colt," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm here." She smiled, her eyes on the last sliver of the sun. "I believe you now. I really am safe. Thank you so much for listening to our story." She was tied to a tree by outlaws. The cowboy cut her loose and said, "You're safe now." We truly hope you enjoyed it. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel, From Wild West, for more tales of love, survival, and adventure. And we would be so grateful if you would share your thoughts on the story in English. Your feedback means the world to us.